Captain Leon Riker moved silently through the dense jungle of Vixia, his mission clear. Gather intelligence on the Amazonians, a feared alien warrior race who had relentlessly fought against human forces for years. The planet's thick atmosphere shrouded everything in a murky green haze, making every step feel like a dangerous gamble. Leon's pulse quickened as he neared the Amazonian outpost, scanning the terrain for hostiles. Suddenly, he heard movement, a faint rustle in the underbrush. Instinctively, he raised his weapon, ready to strike. But as he advanced, he found something unexpected. 2 Amazonian warriors, their bodies covered in bruises and gashes from the recent bombardment. They lay slumped against the remnants of a fallen tree, breathing heavily, eyes fierce despite their clear exhaustion. The Amazonians were infamous for their unmatched combat skills, their towering presence striking fear into human soldiers across the galaxy. Yet here, before him, were 2 of them, defeated, vulnerable, and unable to defend themselves. Leon's orders were to kill any Amazon fighters on sight, but as he stood over the 2 women, his finger hesitating on the trigger, something stopped him. Their eyes locked with his. Defiant, expecting death. One of them, the taller of the 2 with raven black hair, looked him straight in the eyes and spat, "Do it, human. Kill us." Her words stung, but they also revealed something beneath the surface. She wasn't afraid. She was prepared, perhaps even resigned to the idea that death was inevitable in this war. The other warrior, younger and with a deep scar across her cheek, remained silent but met his gaze with the same expectation. Leon lowered his weapon slowly, confusion and empathy warring in his mind. "I'm not here to kill the wounded," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. Both women's eyes widened slightly. The taller one, Zara, narrowed her gaze. "Then why are you here?" she demanded, as if daring him to explain his weakness. Leon hesitated. "Maybe I'm tired of the killing," he admitted quietly. Zara and her sister Alara exchanged glances. They had heard tales of human soldiers, ruthless, relentless, and unyielding. But this one was different. He didn't carry the cold ruthlessness they had been trained to expect. Instead, there was something unsettling in his compassion. "Help us then, if you aren't here to finish the job," Zara said, her voice tinged with both suspicion and challenge. Alara remained silent, still watching the human with cautious curiosity. Leon knew helping them was against protocol. If his superiors found out he'd spared 2 Amazons, he'd be branded a traitor. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized that something had shifted inside him. These weren't just enemies, they were people. Warriors caught in the same cycle of violence that had haunted him for years. He reached into his pack and pulled out a med kit. Kneeling beside Alara first, he began to treat her wounds with practiced hands. "We can't stay here. Patrols are sweeping the area," he said quietly, glancing around the dense jungle. "There's a safe spot a few clicks from here. If you want to live, we need to move." Zara watched him work, her eyes narrowing as if trying to understand his motives. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her tone more confused than confrontational now. "You could easily kill us and complete your mission." Leon looked up from his work, meeting her gaze. "Maybe I don't want to be just another killer in this war," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made Zara pause. Alara, still recovering from the treatment, looked at her sister, then at Leon. "Do we have a choice, Zara?" she asked, her voice hoarse but pragmatic. Zara hesitated for a moment longer before giving a sharp nod. "We'll go with you, but don't think for a second that we trust you, human." Leon stood and helped Alara to her feet. "Fair enough," he replied with a faint smile. "But right now, survival is all that matters." With that, the 3 of them moved carefully through the dense jungle, forming a tentative alliance forged not out of trust, but out of necessity. As they made their way toward the abandoned outpost Leon had scouted earlier, the line between enemies began to blur. The journey to the outpost was tense, every step filled with silent calculation and lingering distrust. Captain Leon Riker led the way, keeping a careful distance from the 2 Amazonian warriors. Behind him, Zara and Alara walked cautiously, their eyes scanning the jungle for threats, but their attention was split between their surroundings and the human soldier who had spared their lives. Zara, the elder sister, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. She had fought in countless battles, seen the ruthlessness of human soldiers firsthand. Their people were at war, brutal, unforgiving. Yet, here was this human, sparing them, tending to their wounds. It didn't make sense, and that lack of understanding made her wary. "Why didn't you kill us?" Alara asked softly, breaking the silence as they moved through the thick jungle. Leon glanced over his shoulder but didn't stop walking. "Like I said before, I'm tired of the killing." Zara's eyes narrowed. "That's not a good enough reason. We're your enemy. You had orders, didn't you? Orders to eliminate us." Leon paused, turning to face them. "Yes, I had orders, but orders don't justify everything. Maybe I'm just tired of watching people, human or alien, die for reasons I can't even remember anymore. This war, it's gone on for too long. Someone has to stop it." Zara snorted, her expression hardening. "One soldier can't stop a war, human. You're a fool if you think sparing us will change anything." Leon's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He knew that trying to explain himself wouldn't change their hardened beliefs, nor would it erase the years of conflict between their people. He turned and continued walking, his silence saying more than words could. Alara, however, wasn't as closed off as her sister. She watched Leon closely, her curiosity piqued. He didn't move like the soldiers they had fought before. There was a weight to his steps, a heaviness to his gaze. He carried the war within him, but unlike the others, it hadn't turned him into a monster. There was something in him that made her believe, if only for a moment, that peace might be possible. As they approached the abandoned outpost, Leon stopped again and turned toward them. "We'll be safe here for a while," he said, his voice steady but exhausted. "No patrols come this deep." Zara crossed her arms, still suspicious. "And what happens next, human? You've saved us, sure, but what's your plan now?" Leon sighed and set his pack down. "Honestly, I don't know. For now, we rest. We'll figure the rest out when we have the strength." Zara's eyes flashed with frustration, but she said nothing more. Alara, however, moved closer to Leon as he set up a small camp. "Maybe he's not so foolish," she said quietly to her sister, who shot her a warning glance. But for the first time since their encounter, the tension between them seemed to ease, just a fraction. As the sun set over the alien landscape, casting long shadows across the jungle, Leon sat apart from the two sisters, staring into the small fire they had built. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts about the mission he had abandoned, the orders he had defied, and the two warriors who now sat across from him, not as enemies but as something different, something more complicated. Zara and Alara spoke softly in their native tongue, their conversation just beyond his comprehension. He didn't need to understand the words to know what they were discussing. Their distrust of him was still evident, and he couldn't blame them for it. He had, after all, been trained to kill them, just as they had been trained to kill him. But now, sitting here with them, he couldn't help but wonder if there was another way. Zara, ever the warrior, remained on edge, her eyes darting between Leon and the jungle, as if expecting an ambush at any moment. But Alara was different. There was a calmness to her, a quiet curiosity that made her seem less hardened by the war. After a while, Alara stood and walked over to where Leon sat. She knelt beside him, her gaze soft but probing. "You said you're tired of the killing," she began. "But why now? Why us? You fought for years, haven't you? What changed?" Leon glanced at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe it was seeing you both there, hurt, expecting me to finish you off. It just didn't feel right anymore." Alara's lips pressed into a thin line as she considered his words. "You're different from the others. I can see it. But that doesn't mean you're not dangerous." "I know," Leon said quietly, "and I won't pretend that I'm not. But I'm done following orders that don't make sense. This war, it's consuming us all." Zara, who had been listening from a distance, finally spoke. "You're a soldier. You fight. That's what you do. Peace isn't something you can just choose because you're tired of fighting." Leon nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. "You're right. I am a soldier. But maybe we can choose not to fight each other. Not anymore." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Zara's expression remained guarded, but Alara's softened further. She could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them. There was something about this human that she couldn't ignore, a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence of the war they had been born into. "Perhaps," Alara said, breaking the silence, "there's more to you than we thought." Zara glanced at her sister, but said nothing. Instead, she stared into the fire, her mind wrestling with the reality of their situation. This human had spared their lives, and despite her instincts to remain distrustful, part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Something irreversible. That night, as the three of them sat in uneasy companionship by the fire, the war felt distant. For the first time, Leon, Zara, and Alara found themselves in a place beyond the conflict. A fragile peace, one that held the promise of something more. If only they had the courage to reach for it. None of them spoke of it yet, but the spark of connection had been lit. And in the darkness of the war, it was the only light they had. The nights on Vixia were long, the alien jungle alive with strange sounds and eerie shadows cast by the twin moons. Leon, Zara, and Alara had formed a fragile routine, a rhythm that allowed them to survive together. The tension between them had eased, but the weight of the war they had left behind still hung over their heads. One evening, after a day spent foraging for food and checking their perimeter, the trio sat around the fire once more. There was a noticeable shift in the air, a deeper, unspoken bond that had begun to form between them. Though they were still cautious of each other, there was a sense of trust growing slowly, like a seed taking root. Zara, ever the warrior, was sharpening her blade when she finally broke the silence. "What happens when they find us?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Leon looked up from the fire, his expression thoughtful. "We keep moving, stay ahead of them." Alara, sitting beside her sister, looked at Leon curiously. "And after that? You said you're tired of the killing, but you know they'll keep coming. They won't stop hunting us." Leon sighed, the weight of her words settling over him. "I don't know, Alara. I don't have a plan beyond surviving. But if we can get off this planet, get to neutral ground, maybe we can find a way to stop the fighting, at least between us." Zara scoffed softly. "Idealistic. You think a few people will stop a galactic war?" Leon's gaze met hers, firm but not unkind. "No, I don't, but I think a few people can make a difference. Maybe we can be an example, show that not everyone wants this war." For the first time, Zara didn't argue. She didn't agree either, but something in Leon's tone made her pause. He wasn't naive. He was a soldier, just like them, hardened by the same war. But he spoke with conviction, a sincerity that was hard to ignore. Alara, watching the exchange, felt something stirring in her chest. She had fought beside her sister for years, facing countless battles, and yet here she was, sitting by the fire with a human who had spared them, who spoke of peace in a way she had never thought possible. That night, after the fire had died down, Alara found herself lying awake, her thoughts swirling with uncertainty. She rose quietly and made her way to where Leon sat on watch. The jungle was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. "Can I sit?" she asked softly. Leon nodded, shifting over to make space. "Of course." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. Then Alara spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I've been thinking about what you said, about stopping the fighting between us." Leon turned to her, his gaze soft but searching. "And?" Alara hesitated, her eyes downcast. "I don't know if it's possible, but I want to believe it is." Leon's heart stirred at her words, the vulnerability in them. "It's hard to believe in something when you've been fighting for so long," he said gently. "But I think that's when it's most important." Alara looked up at him, her silver eyes catching the light of the moons. "You're not like the others. I've seen it since the moment you spared us. I don't understand you." Leon chuckled softly. "I don't understand myself half the time either." She smiled faintly, and for a moment, the distance between them felt smaller, the connection more real. They were two warriors from opposing sides, but in that quiet moment, they weren't enemies. They were just two people trying to find meaning in the chaos. Days passed, and with each one, the bond between Leon, Zara, and Alara grew stronger. They moved through the jungle as a unit, watching each other's backs and sharing stories from their respective worlds. There was still an undercurrent of tension. War had made trust difficult, but the walls between them had begun to crumble. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of evading human patrols, the group returned to their makeshift camp, exhausted but alive. Leon, who had taken a minor wound during a close encounter, sat quietly by the fire as Alara tended to his injury. Zara watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. As Alara worked, her hands steady, Leon couldn't help but notice the gentleness in her touch, a stark contrast to the hardened warrior persona she had worn for so long. He caught her eye, offering a small smile. "You've gotten good at this." Alara smirked. "War teaches you many things. Unfortunately, treating wounds is one of them." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world around them seemed to fade. There was something between them now, something neither had acknowledged but both felt. The growing closeness, the shared vulnerability, it was undeniable. "Alara," Leon began hesitantly, "I need to say something." She paused, her hands stilling as she looked at him, curiosity in her gaze. "What is it?" Leon took a deep breath, his heart racing. He had fought battles, faced death more times than he could count, but this felt different, more dangerous. "I know this is insane, but I feel connected to you. To both of you. This war, it's taken so much from all of us, but being here with you and Zara has made me see things differently." Alara's expression softened, and she shifted closer, her voice gentle. "I felt it too." Leon glanced over at Zara, who had been listening quietly, her usual guarded expression replaced with something more thoughtful. "Zara?" She met his gaze, her jaw clenched as if she were fighting something within herself. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I won't lie, Leon, I've wanted to kill you more times than I can count, but you're not like the others, and I can't deny that something has changed between us." Leon nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and emotion. "I don't know what this is, but I know I don't want it to end." Alara placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm. "Then maybe it doesn't have to." Zara, still standing a few paces away, stepped closer, her eyes flicking between her sister and Leon. "This war, it's always been black and white to me. Us versus them. But now, I don't know. Maybe there's another way." Leon's pulse quickened, his voice filled with determination. "I don't want to be your enemy. I want to build something better, with you both." There was a long pause, the air thick with unspoken tension. Then, finally, Zara nodded. "If you're serious, then I'll fight for it." Alara smiled, her eyes bright with hope. "So will I." In that moment, the three of them stood on the precipice of something new, something that defied the war, defied their pasts, and embraced a future none of them had thought possible. Together, they weren't just survivors, they were something more. As the fire crackled softly in the background, Leon knew that they had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. But for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare him. Instead, it gave him hope. Hope for a future beyond the war. The decision to stand together was a monumental one. After days spent surviving in the wilderness, evading human and Amazonian forces alike, Leon, Zara, and Alara now faced a new reality. They were no longer simply allies out of necessity. They were a united force, bound by something deeper than survival. The next morning, as the three of them gathered around the campfire, there was a palpable shift in the air. Leon had spoken his truth, and the sisters had reciprocated, acknowledging the bond that had grown between them. Now the question was, what next? Zara, always the strategist, spoke first. "We can't stay in the jungle forever. Sooner or later, they'll track us down. We need to move, find a way off this planet." Leon nodded. "I've been thinking the same. But we'll need a plan, and we'll need allies." Alara, sitting beside Leon, looked up at him, her gaze steady but filled with emotion. "You said you didn't want to be our enemy, but what if we go further than that?" Leon turned to her, curious. "What do you mean?" Alara took a deep breath, exchanging a glance with her sister before continuing. "In Amazonian culture, alliances are more than just agreements. They're solidified through bonds, commitments that go beyond words. I'm talking about marriage." The word hung in the air, surprising Leon. Zara's expression was unreadable, but Leon could sense the tension in her. Alara's proposition wasn't just about love, it was a powerful symbol, one that could change the course of the war if played correctly. "Marriage?" Leon asked, his voice careful but intrigued. Zara finally spoke, her voice as calm as ever, but carrying an undercurrent of meaning. "Our people value unity, strength through bonds. Marrying us would not only bind us to you, but it would be a political statement, a union that shows we are no longer enemies." Alara added softly, "It would be more than a truce. It would be the beginning of something new. For us, and for our people." Leon sat in stunned silence for a moment, letting their words sink in. He had never imagined this when he first met them, had never expected that his decision to spare 2 warriors would lead to such a proposal. But as he looked into their eyes, he saw more than warriors. He saw equals, partners. "I'm not just some symbol," Leon said finally, his voice low but firm. "If we do this, it's because we believe in each other. In this." Zara nodded, her expression softening. "We wouldn't ask this of you if we didn't feel the same." Leon's heart raced, but he knew what his answer was. "Then I accept," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Not as a soldier, but as someone who's ready to build something better, with both of you." Alara smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. Then it settled, as they made their vow not with grand ceremonies or formal rituals, but with simple words and shared conviction. The bond between them solidified. It was a pact forged in the heat of conflict but bound by a hope for peace. Leon, Zara, and Alara were now united, not just in purpose but in spirit, and their union would be a force to reckon with. With their vow made, Leon, Zara, and Alara knew they needed to act quickly. Their marriage was more than just a personal bond, it was a strategy. If word got out, it could have far-reaching consequences, but first, they needed to get off the planet and find neutral ground. The trio set their sights on a spaceport deep within Amazonian-controlled territory, a place where they could hijack a ship and escape Vixia. It was a dangerous plan, one filled with uncertainties, but they had no other choice. Time was running out, and staying in the jungle wasn't an option. The journey to the spaceport was fraught with challenges. They moved under the cover of night, avoiding patrols and navigating treacherous terrain. Every step brought them closer to their goal, but also closer to danger. As they approached the outskirts of the spaceport, Leon spotted a group of Amazonian soldiers patrolling the perimeter. "We're going to have to be careful," he whispered, his eyes scanning the area for weak points. "If we get caught here, it's over." Zara, ever the tactician, crouched beside him, her sharp gaze assessing the situation. "We'll need a distraction, something to draw their attention away from the main gate." Alara, crouching on the other side of Leon, glanced at her sister. "I can create a diversion. I know their patrol routes. If I lure them toward the eastern ridge, you two can slip inside." Leon shook his head. "I'm not letting you go alone. We stick together." Zara placed a hand on his arm, her expression calm but firm. "She can handle herself, and it's the only way. We'll be right behind her." Leon hesitated, his instincts screaming to protect both sisters. But he knew Zara was right. They had to trust each other if they were going to survive this. With a plan in place, Alara moved swiftly toward the eastern ridge, using the dense foliage to her advantage. Within minutes, she had drawn the attention of the patrol, leading them away from the gate as planned. Zara and Leon took the opportunity, slipping through the shadows and making their way to the entrance. The spaceport loomed ahead, a massive structure filled with ships, some of them armed, others cargo haulers. Once inside, they quickly located a small transport ship, nimble enough to avoid detection, but powerful enough to get them off planet. Leon worked quickly to override the security systems while Zara stood watch, her eyes scanning for any sign of the patrol's return. Minutes later, Alara rejoined them, her breath heavy but steady. "The patrol's distracted, but we need to move now." Leon gave a nod as the ship's engines hummed to life. "We're ready. Let's get out of here." They boarded the ship, and moments later, they were in the air, leaving the dense jungles of Vixia behind as the stars stretched out before them. But as they broke through the atmosphere, Leon couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. Their union had given them strength, but it had also made them targets, both for the Amazonian forces who would see them as traitors and for the humans who would never understand their bond. They had left Vixia, but the real challenge lay ahead. As the stars blurred into the infinite darkness of space, Leon glanced at Zara and Alara, his heart full of determination. "We've made it this far. Now we find a way to end this war." Zara nodded, her voice filled with resolve. Together, and as the three of them sped toward an uncertain future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. Bound by their vow, their love, and their unshakable belief that peace, no matter how impossible it seemed, was worth fighting for. The ship cut through the black expanse of space, hurtling toward neutral territory where they hoped to find sanctuary and build on their fragile peace. Leon, Zara, and Alara knew the journey ahead would be more difficult than any battle they had fought so far. The fate of their union, and possibly the future of both human and Amazonian relations, hinged on what happened next. As they neared their destination, a small outpost on the neutral planet Araxos, a flicker of doubt crept into Leon's mind. He glanced over at Zara and Alara, both of whom sat in silence, lost in thought. Their marriage was a bold declaration, but they were now fugitives from both their people. The weight of their decision pressed heavily on him, but he reminded himself why they had chosen this path, why they had chosen each other. Alara broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. What if they don't listen? What if this was all for nothing? Zara's jaw tightened. Then we fight. But we've come this far, Alara. We have to try. Leon reached for Alara's hand, squeezing it gently. They'll listen. They have to. If we can make them see that peace between us is possible, maybe they'll realize that the war can end. Zara stood and moved toward the cockpit, her eyes narrowing as the outpost came into view. We're about to find out. The landing was smooth, but the tension in the air was thick as they stepped out onto the landing pad. The neutral zone was a small, desolate place, an old trading post now used for diplomatic meetings and covert discussions. It was the only place where neither human nor Amazonian factions held sway, a fragile balance maintained by strict rules of neutrality. As they approached the entrance, they were greeted by a small delegation from both sides, 2 Amazonian diplomats and a pair of human military officials, flanked by neutral mediators. The stares that met Leon, Zara, and Alara were cold, filled with suspicion and disbelief. Word of their marriage had spread faster than they had anticipated, and it was clear that neither side was pleased. The lead Amazonian diplomat, a tall and imposing figure named Ressa, stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. Arya and Alara of Zenith, what is the meaning of this? You have betrayed our people by consorting with a human. Leon stepped forward, determined to face the accusations head-on. We haven't betrayed anyone. We're trying to end the war, not fuel it. Ressa sneered. End the war? By marrying an enemy soldier? You've dishonored yourself and your people. The human official, Colonel Hendricks, crossed his arms, his expression no less hostile. Captain Riker, you've abandoned your mission and aligned yourself with the enemy. You're a traitor to the cause. Zara's eyes flashed with defiance. We're not traitors. We're trying to find another way. This war has taken too much from both our sides, and it will only continue unless we find a path to peace. Hendricks scoffed. Peace? You really think you can negotiate peace with these warriors? They've slaughtered our soldiers without mercy. Leon felt the frustration rising in his chest. And we've done the same to them. This war is killing all of us. It's time to stop the cycle. The neutral mediators, sensing the tension, stepped forward, gesturing for calm. Ambassador Val, the lead mediator, spoke with authority. We're here to listen. Both sides have been at war for too long, and this meeting is about exploring possibilities. Let's hear what they have to say. Leon took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. We've fought against each other for years, but what we've learned is that we aren't so different. Zara, Alara, and I have proven that peace, true peace, is possible. If we can form an alliance, others can too. Ressa's expression hardened. And you think your union, a single radical act, can undo centuries of conflict? Alara stepped forward, her voice steady and filled with conviction. It's not just about us. Our marriage is a symbol of what can be. If we can find common ground, then maybe, just maybe, others will follow, but it has to start somewhere. The silence that followed was thick with tension, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Both sides were skeptical, and it was clear that the idea of peace through such an unconventional means would not be easily accepted. But as the mediators conferred, there was a glimmer of hope, however fragile, that perhaps the tide could turn. Days passed after the initial meeting, filled with tense negotiations and heated debates. The Amazonian and human delegations struggled to reconcile their deep-seated animosities with the radical concept that Leon, Zara, and Alara presented. The marriage of a human soldier to 2 Amazonian warriors was unprecedented, and the idea of peace born from such a union seemed impossible to many. But amid the chaos, there was progress. Slowly, cautiously, both sides began to see the potential in the alliance. Mediators worked tirelessly to broker agreements that could lead to a ceasefire, while Leon, Zara, and Alara continued to push for their vision of a unified future. One evening, as the three of them stood on a balcony overlooking the barren landscape of Araxos, Zara spoke quietly, her voice heavy with the weight of their journey. "I never thought we'd come this far." Leon smiled, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Neither did I, but we're here. And we're not done yet." Alara, standing beside them, looked out at the stars, her eyes filled with both hope and uncertainty. "Do you think they'll listen? Truly?" Leon wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "They're starting to. That's more than I could have hoped for." As the negotiations continued, a fragile peace began to take shape. Both sides agreed to a temporary ceasefire, a small but significant step toward ending the conflict. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was the beginning of something new. A chance for the warring factions to reconsider their path. On the final day of negotiations, as the terms of the ceasefire were being signed, Ambassador Val turned to Leon, Zara, and Alara. "Your union has sparked something here, something that could change the future of this galaxy. But know this, peace is fragile. It will take time, effort, and sacrifice to maintain it." Zara nodded, her expression resolute. "We're ready for that." Alara, standing beside her, smiled softly. "We've come too far to stop now." Leon, his heart full of pride and determination, looked at the two women who had become his partners in more ways than one. Together, they had defied the odds, forged an unbreakable bond, and set in motion a movement that could change everything. As they left the negotiating chamber, hand in hand, they knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But they also knew that they were stronger together. Stronger because of their love, their trust, and their shared vision for a future free of war. And though the galaxy remained divided, their marriage was a beacon of hope, a symbol that even in the darkest times, love could conquer hate, and unity could overcome division. For Leon, Zara, and Alara, this was only the beginning.